Приветствуем, товарищи. Добро пожаловать на стрим Политштурма. У микрофона товарищ Василий, и сегодня со мной также будет наш американский товарищ, один из руководителей ПШ International, товарищ Томас. Томас, hello.
Привет. Hi, welcome from the United States.
Мгм. Я вижу, у нас небольшие проблемы, не отображаются плашки из Дискорда, но во всяком случае это не критично. Я думаю, в процессе стрима мы с ними разберемся. Ну а пока непосредственно к теме. И сегодня мы поговорим о прошедших выборах в США и о перспективах выбранного на них Дональда Трампа. История с выборами в США упорно держалась в первых строках масс-медиа на протяжении многих месяцев. И в конечном счете, как мы знаем, победу на выборах одержал бывший президент США и первый президент, против которого были выдвинуты уголовные дела. Также Трамп является первым человеком, который смог снова занять пост президента, несмотря на эти обвинения. Его победа вызвала политический шок в Соединенных Штатах и воодушевление различных конкурентов американского империализма на международной арене. Сегодня мы, как я уже сказал, поговорим с нашим американским товарищем о текущей обстановке, о том, как ощущались эти выборы, о том, какие штампы, ярлыки пропаганды сейчас распространяются в Соединенных Штатах, и о том, что нужно делать коммунистам в текущей обстановке. Как и всегда, не забудьте поставить лайк и поддерживайте нас по ссылке, которую вы видите у себя в левом нижнем углу экрана stream.polishturm.com. Для вашего удобства она сейчас будет скинута в чатик в YouTube. У вас есть возможность задать интересующий вас вопрос товарищу Томасу, и я обязательно озвучу его в прямом эфире. Ссылочка в чате на YouTube. Ну и пока что, я думаю, мы будем начинать. Прежде всего, стоит оговорить, что у нас будет такой весьма специфичный формат. Дело в том, что общаться мы будем, естественно, на английском, и поскольку, возможно, не все наши зрители знакомы с основами английского, то я буду предварительно озвучивать вопрос на русском, общаться мы будем на английском, и уже впоследствии, после того, как мы обсудим тот или иной вопрос, я буду кратко формулировать главное содержание того, о чем мы говорили. Ну и опять же, я думаю, мы будем начинать, и прежде всего, конечно, интересует вопрос того, какая сейчас обстановка в Соединенных Штатах, потому что мы могли видеть очень много новостей про выборы, про подготовку к ним, про их итоги, и итоги эти весьма неутешительные для президента от Демократической партии, для Байдена, для его сторонников. Были новости о том, что американцы начинают искать больше в поисковиках о тоталитаризме, об антиутопиях и даже о переезде в другие страны. И я думаю, в связи с этим будет интересно спросить, а чем, собственно, вызван этот страх и насколько он обоснован. So, Thomas, first of all, I think we will speak about the current situation in the United States after these elections, because, you know, there are many news, many materials in the mass media about Americans being dissatisfied with the results of these elections, about them panicking. Of course, there were also materials about rising search queues about totalitarian states, about dystopias, and even about moving from the United States to other countries. I think, first of all, I would like to know what is the reason of this fear, of this dissent, and is it really justified?
Well, what it reminds me of is just a repetition of the 2016 election. And we saw the same attitudes and the same reactions 8 years ago. And yet, I think we can see the reality of this hysteria or the prevalence of it, the continuation of this attention and panic over Trump that we saw after 2016, we're seeing a smaller version of it today. But if you look at the voting numbers, we can see that people actually aren't motivated. They weren't motivated this election to go out to vote against him. The panic wasn't so much that they needed to go out and vote him out. So I would say that the panic really resembles 2016, but the people are less invested, and there's fewer people panicking now than they did 8 years ago, partly because we've already seen a Trump presidency.
Mm-hmm. And based on this, is it really that much of a problem for Americans? Again, since they experienced the first Trump term already.
Well, to touch on that reality, the world today is very different than from 2016. The world is much more unstable. There's a lot more conflict and war, especially ones that Americans are aware of, particularly Israel. That's one of the defining conflicts for American voters right now. And so that instability also feeds into this sense of panic, this sense of hysteria. And so what does Trump signal in this context of world instability? Well, to many Americans, Trump represents a kind of disruption, political instability in America. So Americans are really worried that, Trump is a sign of greater instability in a world that's already unstable. But I think we can see that people just aren't motivated to go out and vote against him because they lived under this instability under a Biden presidency as well. So they don't think that Biden is a magic bullet, a magic cure for this worldwide instability. So there's less resistance to Trump despite the hysteria, but Trump's own backing has stayed consistent. And that's, I think, really important that despite all the hysteria, overall, the political hysteria, the political excitement has fallen, has declined, except among Trump supporters, where it has stayed largely consistent. Trump supporters are still engaged in the Trump candidacy, whereas Democrats are less engaged with the Democrat project.
Mm-hmm. From various mass media materials, especially those from the Western mass media, I see that the propaganda of the Democratic Party puts a lot of efforts in portraying Trump as basically 1984 authoritarian tyrant that will turn America into dystopia. Can you say that this can contribute to these sentiments as well?
Oh, absolutely. And that really defined his first election back in 2016 and the subsequent midterm election for Congress in 2018. People, the American mass as a whole, were really fixated on the Trump project and motivating going out to vote against it. And that was really a product of the media, of course. And so today, this media that people are hearing is repeated from 2016. So in some ways, people are less convinced by it because they've heard the same arguments from before. So I don't think there is some hysteria that I've seen. In my neighborhood, which is a working class neighborhood, I've seen an American flag flown upside down, which is a sign of distress in American political culture. It's kind of saying that the republic is in danger, democracy is in danger. So I saw one working class house where I live display that flag upside down, but I also saw that same symbol, the upside down flag, an upside down flag being flown in a rich neighborhood nearby. So there is some broad concern, but I think this is a temporary engagement because Well, we saw a lot of activism during the 2016 to 2020 period, but I think we're going to see less of it this time. And that's, I think, reflected in the voting data and the polling data that we're seeing.
Mhm. And in my opinion, something that contributed to this hysteria is also widespread populism of both sides, trying to proclaim themselves as the only bearers of good justice and law, and their opponents as socialists, communists, tyrants, similar things.
Absolutely, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I think we will return to the topic of democratic propaganda a few questions later. For now, I will briefly translate all that we discussed to our Russian audience. Ну, я думаю, здесь, если очень коротко, то главная причина заключается в том, что американцы уже сталкивались с президентством Трампа, и оно имело достаточно катастрофические последствия для внутренней политики, для социальной сферы. Здесь можно вспомнить отмену Обамакейр. Вопросы здравоохранения и медицины всегда оставались проблемными местами, потому что в Америке нету бесплатной медицинской страховки. Конечно, в России эта проблема ощущается гораздо меньше, потому что у нас все еще сохраняются достижения советской власти в виде хоть и урезанного, хоть и постоянно ухудшающегося качества, но все еще бесплатного здравоохранения. И среди широких масс населения платная медицина все еще считается чем-то проблематичным. Вот. В то время как в Соединенных Штатах практически все здравоохранение платное, и оно не очень платное. Там огромные суммы. Так что американцы действительно могут говорить о том, что ситуация сильно ухудшится. Но еще одним моментом, который является определяющим всю эту истерику, является, конечно, резкий популизм обеих сторон, который имел место на протяжении последних нескольких месяцев предвыборной агитации. Каждая из сторон пыталась изобразить себя как носителя высшего добра, закона, справедливости, и изобразить своего оппонента как противника всего этого, как изверга. Вот, Трамп изображал своих оппонентов как коммунистов, как леваков, дескать, вот если они останутся, эти леваки, то вот они Америку уничтожат. Демократы, в свою очередь, отвечали тем, что Трамп это буквально фашист, что вот сейчас он придет и Америка будет уничтожена, что сразу и Россия победит, и Китай станет сильнее. Но в конечном счете обе стороны сходились на том, что вот при них Америка будет хорошей и большой, и все ее будут уважать, а вот при их оппонентах она распадется. Так что я думаю, особенно настроение первых дней после объявления результатов выборов, когда, скажем, на том же Reddit было множество публикаций, люди публиковали видео со слезами на глазах о том, что они вот проснулись в Америке, где победил Трамп. Все это является в том числе следствием вот этого накала предвыборной истерики. И раз уж мы говорим про предвыборную агитацию, про обстановку, теперь уже, когда мы знаем, что Трамп победил, было бы очень любопытно поглубже вникнуть в причины его победы. Я думаю, для рядового американца этот вопрос будет более таким открытым, более понятным, потому что там на месте он видит какие-то моменты, которые до нас доходят либо в пересказе русскоязычных СМИ, либо, опять же, в обработке западных СМИ, которые, как мы знаем, точно так же не являются объективными и заинтересованы в том, чтобы поддерживать одну из группировок капитала. Напоминаю всем новопришедшим, что сегодня мы беседуем с нашим американским товарищем Томасом, по поводу выборов в США, по поводу их итогов и по поводу их перспектив. Не забудьте поставить лайк и поддержать наш канал по ссылочке stream.polishturm.com. Ну, разумеется, вы можете задать также вопрос Томасу, и он ответит на него прямо здесь и сейчас. Нам пришло сообщение от пользователя с ником Мирархус Бэйн без какого-либо комментария. Большое спасибо товарищу за поддержку. Будем ждать других сообщений. А пока что мы возвращаемся к теме стрима. И, как я уже сказал, мы спросим по поводу причин победы Трампа. All right, Thomas. So, for a long period of time, the outcome of these elections was very uncertain. And at the end, we know Trump won. However, what reasons of his victory can you name?
I think to explain the victory, I think we need to go into the development of American politics a little bit and see what's going on, or why this result came about. If we look back the past few years, especially I mentioned the 2016 election, right, with a similar setup where you have Donald Trump versus a female established political candidate, Hillary Clinton back then. And in 2016, Trump won in another surprise. And that was even more of a surprise than this one in 2024. The one in 2024, many people did predict that Trump would win. But if you go back in 2016, Trump was more of a surprise. And this was the result of very low voter turnout. People were not very engaged in voting. They weren't very interested in voting. And you had about equal participation among both Democrats and Republicans in 2016. But the Republicans, of course, won through the electoral votes by winning what's become Donald Trump's strong area, the rural communities. And so by winning, sparsely populated, numerous sparsely populated counties and regions, this contributed to a point system that we have in America, the Electoral College, gave that to Trump in 2016. So we saw very low engagement, and in fact, the engagement was among American voters was similar to 2004 with the re-election of George W. Bush. So very, very low voter turnout. And what you saw after that was a huge increase in Democrat engagement because of Trump's election. But until then, Trump's election generated a lot of hysteria, as we mentioned. But the general trend among both Democrats and Republicans, and we have some data that we can share about this, the overall trend among American voters is decreasing engagement, decreasing interest in electoral politics. And you see that in the number of people who register for each party. Of course, population is going up over the years, and yet party loyalty is going down for both parties. And to talk about this election, the 2024, we see that trend continue. So we saw a spike in 2020, right? This panic, and 2018, this panic over Trump led to this huge turnout of Democrat voters to get rid of Trump. But now we've returned to that tendency, that trend of decline that we've seen among all voters, in that there's a decreasing interest in the election. However, while the Democrats are having decreasing interest in these elections, the Republicans have stayed consistent and in fact grew slightly. I think the Democrats lost in this election 10 million votes that they had won in 2020. So that's 10 million people that have lost their interest in the Democrats, whereas Trump was able to maintain his supporters, maintain his base with a number of strategies. But I think really notably what was the assassination attempts on Donald Trump. And I think that really confirmed for a lot of Trump supporters the specialness of Trump, which is also something that the Democrats have been propagandizing, that Trump is unique, that Trump is, particularly radical, and, he's going to make extreme reforms. Many Republicans hear that Democrat propaganda as well, and they say, yes, that's what I like about him. So the Republican loyalty to the party and to Trump has stayed strong, whereas it's evidently loyalty to the Democrats, loyalty to Democrat presidential candidates has fallen dramatically. And this is a continuation of a decades-long trend of falling electoral engagement on both sides. But Trump perhaps gives a new energy and a new a new strength to the Republican movement that the Democrats haven't been able to replicate yet. But we could compare Trump now to perhaps Obama before in the energy that Obama gave the Democrats. Now that Obama energy, that almost left-wing spirit, that left-wing populism that Obama capitalized off of, that has now fallen. And now Trump is, for the American public, Trump represents change, which was the slogan of Obama.
So this means that while Republican audience remained the same, one of the main reasons for Harris' defeat was that the Democrats lost their audience. And what are the key reasons for it?
Well, I think this is something that always happens in American elections. And in that sense, it shouldn't be surprising, the result of this election, in that Americans blame the economic conditions, the situation of the world. I mentioned the American anxiety about the unstable world situation and worrying about world wars and Israel and Ukraine. They can associate those things in real terms with Biden. And, Biden's, policies get attached to Kamala Harris. So people don't want a continuation of the poor situation, so they're going to pick the other guy. And that's the same thing happened to Trump in 2020. Whether or not there was an anti-Trump wave, anti-Trump hysteria in 2020, there was a rejection of the bad situation that Americans were in from 2016 to 2020 that Trump presided over. And now Biden inherits that antipathy, that this negative feeling that Americans have over whoever's in charge at the moment. And particularly, things are getting worse. Things are economically getting worse. And so Biden came after Trump. So Biden presides over worse situations than Trump did from 2016 onward. So then the next election in 2028, the advantage would be for the Democrats. But I think so that's a more boring explanation or a more boring context. But I think what's more interesting is that the Democrats have a demographic advantage overall. The Democrats have, statistically, the edge in all presidential elections, national elections. Democrats have more voters than Republicans do overall. But I think what we're seeing is the decision in the election isn't being made by demographics here. It's being made by the political consciousness of the masses. And the political consciousness of the Democrat, people who vote for Democrats, it has led them to not be loyal to the Democrats. So for economic reasons and other policy reasons, loyalty to the Democrats among their own base has fallen. And we can go into multiple issues that will have alienated Democrat voters from the Democrats. I mean, one might be conflict around the world, and Biden now is being attached to Israel. And Biden was always known for his ties to Israel before he was president or vice president. Biden was very, very close to the Israel lobby in America. And now, which is normal almost, all American politicians are friendly with Israel. But now many more left-wing Democrats can get angry and say, "Oh, Biden is helping Israel commit these crimes in Gaza and elsewhere." So they can blame Biden, and so I think that's one reason. And they tried to turn things around with Kamala. Kamala tried to appear more open to the left. Kamala tried to appear more open to anti-Israel, pro-Palestine stuff. But overall, one things we noticed was the sudden change, towards the end of this election, Biden as the candidate and switching to Harris. And that was mainly because of polling data telling the Democrats that Biden running against Trump would not do well. So, even before the election, the Democrats knew how bad this was for Biden, that Biden would not perform well. So they were hoping that Kamala would mix things up and improve their odds. But in the end, it just seems, I think this doesn't reflect stability for Americans, that there wasn't the ability to build up a campaign or a media image for Kamala as much in such short of a time. So there wasn't as much buildup of a cult around Kamala. There wasn't as much of a buildup of a media apparatus around Kamala, as opposed to the victory that the Democrats had in 2020. The media apparatus pushing an anti-Trump campaign, a Democrat presidential campaign in 2020. This was a huge media project, and Biden was very well established in American political minds because he was the vice president for Obama. So Biden in 2020 gets the benefit of all this love that people have for Obama. But then his replacement, Biden's replacement in 2024, Kamala Harris, people don't know very well. And so she appears as a continuation of Biden, and any left-wing positioning that Kamala makes as a switch from Biden, this isn't really endearing to the Democrats. She didn't make these left-wing promises early enough and long enough with enough media attention on her about them. So she didn't generate loyalty herself, whereas Trump is generating serious loyalty from his own base. And Trump can say all these things criticizing Biden in the last 4 years. So Trump gets the advantage of being able to criticize the last 4 years of American governance that Americans are really upset about. Americans are really upset and anxious about what's going on inside America as well, not just internationally. Americans are very worried about food prices, the economy, and things like this.
Mm-hmm. I also think that one of the key features was that, again, Biden was well known while Harris was just some random woman. Yes, she was she is still a vice president till Trump's inauguration. However, Biden was well known for almost a decade. And one particularly interesting thing that I saw is the results of search queues for Google reflecting on the people's knowledge about them. They started, there was a search term, why is there no vote for Biden, spiking in late October, early November. And the search term for Harris was almost always low, except November 4 and 5.
I think that is an important reason for the result as well. Yeah, that Kamala, even when she was vice president, she didn't generate a lot of attention on herself. She was given very controversial roles by Biden. And a lot of insiders in American politics were saying that Biden didn't want Harris to replace him. Biden didn't want Harris to overshine him, to outdo him. So Biden gave her these bad positions, and Biden didn't really prepare her or push her into the spotlight during those 4 years where she was vice president. Whereas Biden, under Obama, Biden was a very beloved figure in American politics from during the 8 years of the Biden presidency, or the Obama presidency, sorry, he was kind of this lovable oaf who would make these silly comments and there were all these memes about him. So people had this kind of general, openness to him. Whereas Kamala, she didn't have this, the time or the media space to generate this popular attitude towards her. So yeah, and it's like you're saying, people really didn't know. And the sudden switch from Biden to Kamala at the end of this most recent election, I think that made it even more confusing for American Democrats.
Mm-hmm. So the key elements of Trump's victory was the consistency of his audience, the Trump factor itself, like as a person, as his populist rhetoric, and inconsistency of the actions of the Democratic Party, their controversies over various international questions, and their sudden change of a candidate, resulting in people just not knowing who is Kamala Harris.
And the negative feelings that people have about the current situation in America, which always generates a negative view on the incumbent president. The sitting president will always get criticized for the bad situation in America, and the situation has gotten worse, gotten very bad since 2020. So Biden gets tarred with the developments of the 2020 to 24 period, whereas Trump didn't have as many negative associations with him from the 2016 to 2020 period.
Thank you. Собственно, сейчас вот мы поговорили по поводу причин победы Трампа, и наш товарищ видит их в нескольких факторах. Один из них заключается в том, что действующий президент всегда находится в более уязвимом положении по отношению к своим соперникам, потому что на него можно повесить все текущие проблемы, заявив, что это вот все из-за текущего президента. Дальше свою роль сыграла аудитория Трампа, республиканцы, Трамп сам по себе как личность, как политик. Главное значение его заключалось в том, что он был достаточно стабилен и во многом принципиален в своих утверждениях, в своем поведении, поступках, в своей политической позиции, в то время как демократы не смогли, во-первых, договориться между собой по ряду ключевых вопросов, и, с другой стороны, сама политика Байдена, Харрис, как президента и вице-президента от демократов, носила весьма противоречивый характер, поэтому колеблющаяся часть аудитории либо отошла к республиканцам, либо просто отказалась голосовать за Байдена. Ну и также немаловажную роль сыграла смена кандидатов с Байдена на Харрис. Во многом, я думаю, это связано с тем, что республиканцам удалось именно запугать демократов, сделать возраст Байдена одним из факторов своей пропаганды, что, дескать, вот у него и проблемы с моторикой и со всем прочим, и разговаривать он с трудом может, и ходит он едва, так что вот, мол, Трамп из-за этого гораздо лучше. И демократы повелись, только это привело к обратному эффекту. Оказалось, что аудитория за несколько месяцев практически не знает ничего о Камале Харрис, в то время как отсутствие Байдена в списках кандидатов вызвало немало удивления. Я вот объяснял нашему товарищу, что были новости о том, что американцы массово начали искать, кто такая Харрис, только когда они увидели ее имя в бюллетенях для голосования. И одновременно с этим резко пошли вверх запросы по типу, почему Байдена нету в бюллетене, как вписать Байдена в бюллетень. Ну и, конечно, международные вопросы, та же позиция по Палестине. Получилось как? Республиканцы всегда были про Израиль. Трамп серьезно поддерживал Израиль в период своего президентства. Мы знаем и о сделке века, и о признании Соединенными Штатами Иерусалима как столицы Израиля. Байден, в свою очередь, ну, мы знаем, что он продолжает поставлять оружие Израилю даже после начала конфликта в Газе. И здесь демократы, с одной стороны, не могли ничего с этим сделать, а с другой стороны, Харрис, пытаясь как-то маневрировать и найти середину между поддержкой Израиля и поддержкой Палестины, в итоге оттолкнула как произраильскую публику, так и пропалестинскую. В случае с последней, например, вышло так, что множество голосов американских мусульман ушли сторонникам третьих партий, например, экологам. Однако в условиях американской избирательной системы это привело не столько к росту популярности третьих партий, сколько к ухудшению положения демократов. Так что, если мы говорим о причинах победы Трампа, то они лежат, во-первых, в последовательности позиций республиканцев, во-вторых, в самом положении демократов как условно правящей партии, и, в-третьих, в непоследовательной политике самих демократов, которые не смогли сформировать какую-то четкую принципиальную повестку, ну и, конечно, сменили кандидата практически перед самым началом выборов. Ну, а я напоминаю всем, кто к нам только что присоединился, что сегодня мы общаемся с нашим американским товарищем по поводу прошедших выборов, разбираем, почему Трамп победил, как сейчас живется в Соединенных Штатах и какие перспективы у президентства Трампа. Не забудьте поставить лайк и поддерживать нас по ссылке stream.polishturm.com. Вы можете задать вопрос как просто на стрим, так и непосредственно товарищу Томасу, и он обязательно на них ответит. Нам пришло сообщение от пользователя с ником Strikeway. Возможно ли кредиты для населения при социализме или это буржуазный пережиток? И если да, будут ли они на всем протяжении социализма или только в отдельно взятый период? В чем тогда качественное различие в обоих формациях? Вроде как при НЭПе были кредиты, но для предприятий. У рабочих были беспроцентные займы. Спасибо за поддержку. Вопросы о советской экономике требуют достаточно обстоятельного подхода, потому что на многие из них дать вопрос вот прям сходу достаточно трудно. Я думаю, мы осветим этот вопрос в одном из наших грядущих материалов. Вы можете также обратиться к опыту советской истории. В Советском Союзе тоже был банк, были сберкассы. Опять же, вот написали по поводу займов. Я не смогу сейчас ответить по поводу кредитов, но, насколько я помню, с того, что я читал, информации о них не было. Опять же, не нужно рассматривать отдельные инструменты как что-то вырванное из контекста, что здесь оно есть, скажем, вот при капитализме вот у нас есть и банки, в принципе, займы у нас тоже есть, а при социализме, скажем, всего этого не будет. Опыт Советского Союза показывает, что при социализме есть банки, ну, по крайней мере, один государственный банк, есть и сберкассы, и вклады, и очень многие различные элементы. Кстати говоря, мы вот сейчас можем наблюдать по примеру развития всех вот этих экосистем различных банков, что все мы потихоньку приходим к тому, что банки для рядового гражданина России, скажем, превращаются в фактически одинаковые конторы, просто под разными логотипами и вывесками. У каждой из них есть свое приложение на телефон, каждая из них практически предлагает какие-то привилегии по типу кэшбэка, по типу каких-то бонусных баллов, и в конечном счете мы приходим просто к вопросу о том, что в сути своей они уже друг от друга не отличаются именно по восприятию. Так что я могу сказать, что здесь, скажем, вот капитализм готовит уже техническую базу для того, чтобы просто объединить все банки в один государственный банк, который точно так же будет иметь, скажем, приложение и точно так же выдавать какие-то преимущества, там, бонусы, кэшбэк, бонусные баллы. Вот. Все это имеет свою роль, свое значение, и мы видим, что капитализм подготавливает почву для социализма. Но пока что мы вернемся к нашим американцам, к Трампу, к президенту. И сейчас мы, наверное, спросим нашего товарища по поводу очень любопытной истории. Дело в том, что предвыборная агитация демократов неоднократно раздувала историю о некоем проекте 2025, который якобы планирует воплотить Трамп и его сторонники сразу после своей победы. Я думаю, будет интересно узнать, в чем он вообще заключается и насколько правдоподобны эти сведения. Thomas, so one of the key issues with democratic agitation was the history of the so-called Project 2025, which Trump allegedly plans to implement and with his supporters right after his inauguration. Can you explain the essence of this story and if this information has any truth behind it?
I think it's important to explain one thing, that the Project 2025 isn't an official publication from Trump or his administration or his campaign at all. So Project 2025 comes from this proposal, this initiative by one of the most powerful and influential political consultation groups in America. It's been ranked in the top 10 for the most influential, what's called think tanks, one of the right-wing ones. And this is basically, so it's not an official policy. That's an important point. But it's basically a more right-wing faction of the Trump coalition, so to speak. And that Trump, we know, really gets a lot of energy and a lot of support from the furthest right sections of the American political sphere. And this really represents that. But the important thing to remember about Trump is that he's opportunistic, and that he has enough political awareness to know what is productive for him, what will be good for him, and what won't. And Trump has actually gone against this plan, or he said, "Oh, I don't support this plan." And in reality, it doesn't come from him. It comes from this group called the Heritage Foundation, which is that consultation group I referenced. And they are basically trying to woo Trump. They're trying to sway him over to their by telling him things that they want to hear, or that he wants to hear. So they're making a lot of suggestions for very far right things, and they say things that Trump likes to hear. One thing that the Heritage Foundation started to do was support Trump's claims that the 2020 election had been stolen from him. So they are really reaching to that direction in order to make this their initiative more likely to be implemented by Trump. And I think many aspects of the program, of the Project 2025, could be implemented. It's very reasonable that many people, many of these policies will actually be implemented. But it's part of this scare tactic by Democrats to say, "Oh, this is what they really believe, and they're going to implement all of this," when in fact this is a more fringe. These are fringe policies that the right wing is trying to become more legitimate. They're trying to make these policies more realistic and more probable by publishing this document and getting Democrats to talk about it and getting Democrats to show it to Donald Trump. So there is some reality to the concerns, but it's like with the 2020 election and the concerns over a violent overthrow of the government, right, to prevent Biden's election in 2020. These weren't really this wasn't going to manifest a right-wing revolt in this country. The January 6th violence, and which is very closely attached to this Project 2025, and Democrats' fears about the abolition of civil rights, the abolition of political limitations on the president, and things like this. Democrats associated Jan 6 and Project 2025 together. But like with January 6th, this was not very likely to succeed, but in fact is just a tool, a strategy to make their policies, make more right-wing policies more likely to be implemented.
Mm-hmm. And what can you say about Trump's actions as he himself will do? What are the most predictable actions?
Well, like I said, Trump is opportunistic. Trump is going to do what's good for him, right? And so that doesn't mean any political loyalty to a program like this. However, Trump is interested in many of these policies, so it's possible that he will try to pass them. But I think it's important to remember that he probably won't succeed for many of them, and that's also because he won't try very hard. Trump, if it's too difficult or if there's too much opposition, Trump will likely abandon many of these policies, or just move on from them without having completed them or implemented them. If you recall, in 2016, there was all the hysteria among the Democrats over the wall, right? Build the wall, and things like this coming from the Trump group. But what did we see in terms of the wall and Donald Trump? Donald Trump really didn't do much for the wall. He didn't seriously transform American border policy. And the changes that Trump did make to American immigration policy, Biden and the Democrats have actually maintained. So they're not that extreme. The changes that Trump did manage to push through on immigration, Biden seemingly thinks that those are reasonable changes. And the project to build a wall is just part of a normal project of governance, a normal project of bourgeois politics that Obama did. Obama built much of the wall that Trump now takes credit for. Much of this fencing and wall defensive infrastructure had been built or had been started to be built from Bush to Obama. And when Biden took office, Biden continued this policy of building the wall and building up, almost military defenses on the Mexican border. So these things aren't, the most extreme forms of them probably won't be implemented. But the ones that are useful from this program and from Trump's own mind, those are going to be selected up, and those are going to pass through the political process. And more now, it's going to be easier for him. There's going to be less opposition now because of the composition of Congress and the House and the Senate and the Supreme Court are now in his favor. So he'll be able to do more, but he's still going to be limited. And he's going to be limited by his own political inclinations as well, his own to be loved by his audience, desire to seem important, and yet he doesn't want to alienate his friends among the capitalists, right? Many of whom are Democrats. He doesn't want to alienate either side. So he's going to try to play to both sides, but implement what he can on the way. So there might be some attacks on, let's say, LGBT people, but it's likely that this won't be a serious campaign, right? This won't be a serious legal process necessarily, because he just has to attempt. All he has to do is make an attempt at a reform against LGBT, and that will excite his base, right? His supporters. They'll say, "Oh, he tried. Look, he tried to do it." And even if it fails, Trump can say that he attempted it. And meanwhile, he can do other policies that are more supported by both sides. And I think Trump has the opportunity to gain a lot of support from the Democrats for a lot of his policies. despite all this propaganda saying that he's so unusual and so radical and extreme, he's going to be able to do things that the Democrats are really happy with. I think, especially in terms of Israel, right? Trump is going to be more pro-Israel than even Biden was. And so that's going to get a lot of support from Democrats.
Thank you. Только что поговорили с нашим товарищем по поводу этого самого проекта 2025. История его такова, что множество различных правых институтов, масс-медиа распространяют информацию различной степени достоверности, и, соответственно, оппоненты республиканцев пытались выдергивать эту информацию для того, чтобы составить впечатление о том, что все они подготавливают некий план действий для первого года президентства Трампа, и вот все, о чем они говорят, начиная от националистической до практически неонацистской риторики, будет воплощено в жизнь. В действительности же наш товарищ считает, что политика Трампа носит такой более оппортунистический характер, в том смысле, что Трамп будет стараться лавировать между республиканцами и демократами, и даже более того, он утверждает, что демократы во многом на самом деле согласны с Трампом, потому что они будут поддерживать его политику. Например, вот по поводу стены, Трамп сделал постройку стены против мигрантов на границе с Мексикой одним из элементов своей риторики, но на деле большая часть этой стены строилась еще при Обаме. А Обама был охарактеризован как такой достаточно прогрессивный кандидат. Ну, в наших реалиях все так называемые прогрессисты из демократической партии — это скорее центристы или левоцентристы. Естественно, никакого разговора о левых или социалистах или коммунистах из демократической партии речи идти не может. Во многом это пропагандистские ярлыки республиканцев. Ну, в целом же суть такова, что как такового проекта 2025 как программы Трампа не существует, а сам Трамп будет полагаться скорее на точечные действия. Скажем, он неоднократно говорил о том, что планирует снижать налоги, и, естественно, это означает снижение налогов для корпораций. Неспроста же ведь Маск буквально недавно стал руководителем одного из новых департаментов, который будет называться, кажется, департаментом по анализу государственной эффективности. И там вышла такая забавная аббревиатура, созвучная с, во-первых, мемом про собаку в интернете, а с другой стороны про одноименную криптовалюту, которая после этого объявления резко подскочила в цене. Напоминаю всем новоприходящим, что сегодня мы обсуждаем с нашим американским товарищем результаты выборов в Соединенных Штатах, действия Трампа и его перспективы. Не забывайте ставить лайк и поддерживать наш канал по ссылочке stream.polishturm.com. Вы можете задать вопрос или просто поддержать нашу работу, а также задать вопрос нашему американскому товарищу, и он ответит на него в прямом эфире. Как и всегда, для вашего удобства ссылочка дублируется в чат. И я думаю, еще один момент, который было бы интересно затронуть, это вопрос о внутренней риторике американского режима, потому что то, что мы сейчас видим в передаче от наших отечественных СМИ, заключается в том, что Трамп позиционирует как такого сторонника мира, что вот он якобы сейчас все устроит, что вот он устроит мир, что сейчас, мол, напряженность будет меньше, и поэтому, я думаю, будет интересно узнать, что именно говорят о Трампе, что сам Трамп и, в принципе, и республиканцы, и демократы сейчас говорят на рядовых американцев, какую пропаганду они распространяют. So, one of the key features that I want to know of the current American regime is its rhetoric on the inner audience. For example, here in Russia, we're mostly being subjected to Russian mass media portraying Trump as a peacemaker. Like he will be ruling America for the next 4 years. He will establish peace. He will stop supporting European Union. He will stop funding Ukraine. And in this case, it's interesting to know what is the rhetoric of the current American government for average Americans, something probably about conservatism, traditional values, religion.
That's one aspect of Trump that is almost like the Democrats portray it, in that Trump is more unique in his use of rhetoric. And going back to that opportunism that I mentioned before, his rhetoric is like that as well, that his rhetoric is very opportunistic, including on religion. Trump is publicly not a very religious person. He doesn't care about that sorts of thing, but he can utilize that language, that religious language. But that's not unique to him at all, in fact, because all Democrats and all Republicans use this language of religion constantly. Even Obama, right? Even these more left-wing figures, even people who claim that they're not liberals, that they're leftists who support Democrats, even leftists on the Democrat side say this language about patriotism, religion, right? Faith in God, and patriotism to America. So Trump, in some ways, he is unique in that he's willing to change up his rhetoric and, in fact, contradicts himself constantly. So he can go with whatever he believes is most useful. And his use of rhetoric is very famous by now. In that his rhetoric is very wild and not very edited, and so this has had some repercussions during his presidency from 2016 onward, that he would make these comments on Twitter, right, and other public forums, and that would have big consequences due to his position as the presidency. He would make these comments saying that NATO is being unfair. And that the EU is cheating America, or even that China is cheating America. So you could say that Trump is very anti-China, anti-EU, but are his policies going to reflect his rhetoric that is constantly changing? So he can make rhetorical claims and statements that he doesn't need to remain loyal to. And I think one particular example of that is the anti-war stuff. When Trump was elected in 2016, he was notable for being against the Iraq War that the Republican Party led and that the Democrats supported under George W. Bush in the early 2000s. Trump came out in the 2016 election to say that the Iraq War was bad, right? And he can say that he's a peacemaker on North Korea, right? And in that way, we can see the contradictions with his anti-China rhetoric, because Trump really worked closely with China to have this dialogue process with North Korea, right? And North Korea was shut off from American dialogue for a long time. And around 2018, we saw this new economic ties, right, and new diplomatic ties between North Korea and America, North Korea and South Korea, and this was all helpful to China. China wants North Korea to be normalized, right? They want their dependent to be a normal part of the broader economy, but Trump, so Trump can say he's anti-war in that regard, but he can always threaten war with North Korea anyway. Doesn't matter. So he has it both ways, and that was something that contributed to the hysteria of 2020 and 2016. That people were worried, oh, Trump's going to launch nukes. That Trump is so unstable and he's not very politically professional. That he'll start a nuclear war, even with Russia. And now we kind of think, at least it's often portrayed in America, that Trump is very pro-Russia, and that's one of the reasons why we should be against him. But I think there's a lot of difference between this current rhetoric of Trump with the previous rhetoric of Biden. Biden didn't want to use inflammatory rhetoric. Biden defined himself rhetorically by being out of sight, very normal, very stable, and kind of shelling themselves, protecting themselves with this veneer of political professionalism on Biden. Whereas Trump can be a little more free to make opportunistic claims and statements. But will he actually change the terms of the relationship between the US and NATO? Well, probably not. He might make some reforms in regards to the EU and NATO, but they won't necessarily be anti-imperialist reforms. And in fact, they may help projects in the long term, such as the creation of an EU army, which is something that France and Germany are really pushing for, their own independent military force that's not dependent on America. Trump, by demanding that NATO and the EU be more militarily independent from US capital and equipment, that he could actually help them start this project of an EU army or more military buildup by the EU itself. So what he can claim to be, I'm being anti-NATO, anti-EU, actually is something that the capitalists in Germany and France could be very happy about. But at the same time, Trump's not going to end this relationship with NATO overall. And in fact, Trump on Iran, which I think is a big future policy, there's a lot of potential anti-Iran activity that could happen in the next 4 years. Trump will coordinate very closely with NATO on this. Trump will be very aligned with the EU and NATO and other, greater powers if there is pressure put on Iran or even a bombing campaign or an attack on Iran. He'll get overall support, but he can maintain this balance. People say, if you attack Iran, that will get Russia and China to attack America, but that's probably not going to happen, especially if Trump maintains good relations with Russia. Then that actually opens up the greater possibility of provocation in Iran. So I could talk more about that, but that's one example of, it's hard to pin down his rhetoric. I could talk more about the internal rhetoric.
Mm-hmm. So, if I understand you correctly, the key features of the American propaganda on the national scale are basically the same, just as they've been for years. It's patriotism, it's chauvinism, it's aggressive policies around the world, it's keeping the position of a superpower, right?
Right. The rhetoric will be the same but more elevated, but the policies will be the same, and the policies will be very similar to what Biden was doing. Maybe more provocation, and the rhetoric will become more exaggerated along with that provocation, military provocation. But the rhetoric is fairly similar in terms of Democrats and Republicans both make the same statements about conflict with Iran or support for Israel. Democrats and Republicans, the rhetoric they use is almost identical on these certain issues, but there's a difference in some issues. But internally, I think Trump isn't too much different from previous Republican presidents or even the general attitude of politics, which is patriotism, religion, and there is a growing dissatisfaction with this rhetoric. There's a growing dissatisfaction with American, with traditional values. More and more Americans don't support these things. But like we said before, Trump maintains his base through this rhetoric. So he doesn't have to worry about the people who don't like his rhetoric because he's able to maintain his support among this strong group of people.
Thank you. Собственно, по поводу пропаганды наш американский товарищ говорит, что в целом она не менялась. В основном акцент делается на том, что Америка продолжает сохранять свое положение сверхдержавы, такой непобедимый бастион свободы, демократии. Но в действительности, конечно, все мы знаем, что это не так. И эта политика при Трампе будет сохраняться. Тем более, что это тесно связано с, в общем-то, согласием и республиканцев, и демократов по подавляющему большинству вопросов современности. Ну, только Трамп будет, скажем, делать подход с несколько другой стороны, в то время как демократы пытались в своей пропаганде и риторике упирать на то, что вот враги Соединенных Штатов, вот они поднимаются, что вот Трамп сейчас придет, вот он с ними, что вот Америка при нем станет слабее. Трамп, в свою очередь, делал акцент на том, что он мог договориться с врагами, в то время как Байден, мол, и демократы сделать этого не могут. А он сможет договориться еще и так, чтобы, значит, интересы Америки отстоять, и все будет хорошо. Эта риторика сохраняется, и, как говорит наш товарищ, при Трампе она изменяться не будет в основе своей. Будет, в общем-то, все то же самое, точно так же, как и большинство политических мер, которые пытается и будет проводить Трамп, точно так же эти политические решения являются наследниками решений его предшественников. Я напоминаю нашим товарищам, которые, я вижу, подсоединяются, что сегодня мы беседуем с нашим американским товарищем по поводу прошедших выборов, по поводу дальнейших перспектив Трампа и по поводу обычной жизни в Соединенных Штатах. Не забудьте поставить лайк и, конечно, поддерживайте наш ресурс по ссылочке в чате на YouTube. И сейчас, я думаю, еще один момент, о котором будет интересно спросить товарища Томаса, это реакция среди левого сегмента американского общества на итоги этих выборов и их отношение к дальнейшим перспективам президентства Трампа. Alright, Thomas, so one of the another important things would be to know the reaction of the left segment of the American society, of different leftist structures in the United States, their reaction on the Trump's victory, and their opinion on the upcoming 4 years of his presidential term.
Well, what we saw the first time this happened in 2016 was this rise of the left-wing movement, and particularly the ascendancy of what culminated in 2020 or 2014, right, with the Black Lives Matter, anti-Black racism movement in America. This was really this preceded the Trump election in 2016, but was really heightened, and the activism of that movement was married to the anti-Trump feelings. So you had a big boost in activism in that regard. And you had a lot of other left-wing activism at that time that I think we all see wasn't very effective or didn't really accomplish much. You have things like Chaz or CHOP in Seattle. You have things like BLM and other protest movements. But notably, from 2020 to 2024, we saw a collapse of this activism and a collapse of left-wing activity. And these groups are still going on, but they're not as proactive as they were. So what we might see over the next 4 years is more activity from these groups. So who are these groups and what kind of increase are we going to see? Well, we have some groups that claim to be left-wing that will really benefit from this. And I think that's the most important takeaway in terms of the development of the left. Here in America, the left is really associated with the Democrats. The left is really associated with liberals. And Biden tried to make himself seem like a pro-immigrant, pro-union, labor union, pro left-wing position as a candidate. But I think what we see, or what we mentioned before, was this decreasing loyalty to the Democrats. And I think more left-wing aspects of the Democrats are moving away. Because partly the Democrats are trying to win right-wing voters. And that's an explicit plan that the Democrats have had for many years now, to try to implement more right-wing policies in order to win voters from the Republicans. So we could see as a consequence the loss of more left-wing voters. And a big left-wing development of the Trump era, 2016, was this rise of the DSA, the Democratic Socialists of America. Bernie Sanders, AOC are some names that are more famous. But will we see a similar increase over the next 4 years among the DSA? I think there may be an increase. Over the last 4 years, the DSA actually performed very poorly. DSA lost a good number of membership. I believe they claimed that they had, at their height in the Trump era, 100,000 members, and now they're progressively losing them. People aren't renewing their membership to the DSA. So you have a decline of the Democrats, decline of loyalty to the Democrats, and that includes loyalty to this left-wing faction of the Democrats, because leftists can see that the Democrats have no loyalty to left positions. So that leaves more active left groups, who are more involved in protests, as opposed to the DSA that are more involved in democratic elections. You have groups like PSL and other such things. So I think we'll see a growth of this sort of more useless protest action by groups like PSL. I think we'll see some of that, but there's really no future that's clearly coming for the left. The left doesn't really have a lot of energy right now, even though the general mood of the masses of people in America are open to the left. This is a perfect time for left-wing recruitment, left-wing radicalism, but I think there's no organized energy to take advantage of that. And the organizations that are there are like PSL or DSA. I don't think that they're going to make use of this energy very well or very effectively. And in terms of protests, we saw a lot of protests against Palestine, but it's questionable whether this will continue into Trump. Trump may provoke more conflict with Israel and Iran, and that may bring about more left-wing protests, left-wing activism, but it will be more like what we saw with BLM and protests in the 2016-2020 period, where you have a few protests, but not really much result. And in 2020, you had a lot of, or that period, 2018, 2020, you had a lot of the Democrats conceding to the left and saying, oh, yes, we'll fight racism, we'll be anti-war. But now I think the Democrats have signaled that they're not going to concede as much to this left wing. So I think we'll just have to see what the left wing, the larger left wing group does. But I think this is a real opportunity for more genuine leftists, more genuine Marxists to really do their work and actually have their work be very effective because of the ineffectiveness of the other left groups that are existing right now and their inability to take advantage of this situation.
Mhm. I also saw that many Democrats, after losing these elections, started blaming leftist groups that they were the reason Kamala Harris lost these elections, like that their agitation around various questions like Palestine distracted the audience and let Republicans win.
And this is very funny because we can compare this election to previous elections, right? Russian viewers may recall Bernie Sanders and his campaign. I should say campaigns, both in 2016 and 2020. Bernie Sanders was a very popular campaign, and he's one of the more popular political figures in all of America. I think he was the number one most popular at the time of his between 2016 and 2020. So you have these figures like Bernie Sanders, but now in the 2024 election, Bernie Sanders isn't running against the presidential candidate. There is no left-wing opposition. And so they made a lot of noise after Hillary lost in 2016, blaming Bernie, which made more sense because Bernie got a lot of attention, Bernie got a lot of voters, and he criticized Hillary from a left-wing stance. But if you look at the 2024 election, where is the Bernie? There is no Bernie equivalent to make this left-wing criticism of Kamala or Biden. So there is no left-wing force undermining this election. So it's this zombie argument to punish the left and to encourage this more right-wing turn of the Democrats that we've already mentioned, right? This plan that the Democrats have to recruit Republicans by being more moderate than the crazy Trump. And in fact, Democrats paid hundreds of millions of dollars to promote the more crazy Trump Republicans in congressional races because they wanted to boost more moderates. They thought that the extreme Trump people would scare moderates into being elected, scare voters into electing moderates. Now, it's ironic today that they're repeating the argument against Bernie that was relevant in 2016 and 2020 when it's not relevant now at all. And the only left-wing figure who is criticizing is Jill Stein, right? Jill Stein and the Green Party, they're now the recipient for this energy. And you had a lot of this political motion going on before the election with people like Cornel West saying that he would run and that he would run with the Green Party and he would run with this other weird right-wing anti-imperial group. So you could say, oh, Jill Stein hurt Harris, but the numbers don't support this. Jill Stein didn't get enough votes or didn't take away any votes from Harris that it would matter. And in fact, it's almost funny to make this claim that Jill Stein had a negative effect on Harris because Trump won so strongly. Trump won in this 2024. He won so with such a majority that even if all the Jill Stein voters had joined Kamala, it wouldn't have made a difference. So this attack on the left doesn't really track. But so they're just trying to reinforce this right-wing transition that the Democrats are trying to make away from things like Obamacare and towards more, a moderate position where they can be more opportunistic and say that they can be right-wing or left-wing, depending on what they need to be.
Mhm. So the whole issue of blaming leftists is probably going around trying to find who is responsible for the Democrats' defeat.
Right. They don't want to take any responsibility. They don't want to ascribe any real responsibility to the real forces that are behind it, which have been mentioned previously: the consistent decline in voter engagement, the consistent decline in loyalty to the Democrats, the lack of any left-wing policies by the mainstream Democrats. They don't want to talk about those things at all. And so they'd rather create this fake conversation about attacking the left.
Мгм. Thank you. По поводу левых, наш товарищ говорит, что в эпоху президентства Трампа был небольшой скачок, связанный с ростом числа местных широколевых, так называемых демократических социалистов Америки, иконой которых долгое время был сенатор Берни Сандерс, демократ, кажется, от штата Вермонт. И вот он долгое время был пытались собрать вокруг него поддержку и в 2016 году, и в 2020, однако не вышло. Вот. А в текущих выборах демократы пытаются найти среди левых козла отпущения, связать свой провал именно с ними. И, как мы говорили, в этом действительно есть, скажем так, доля истины, потому что непоследовательная политика Харрис, Байдена, Демократической партии оттолкнула тех самых демократических социалистов от Демократической партии, и по поводу Палестины, например, согласия не было. Здесь, опять же, можно сказать по поводу американских мусульман, которые, соответственно, отказались голосовать за демократов. Но в целом в поражении, естественно, виноваты не левые, а виноваты сами демократы, которые своей политикой и своей риторикой подготовили переход власти к республиканцам. Напоминаю нашим товарищам, нашим зрителям, что сегодня мы общаемся с нашим американским товарищем по поводу выборов в США, по поводу президентства Трампа грядущего и по поводу его перспектив. У вас все еще есть возможность задать ему вопрос на интересующую вас тему, и он ответит на него в прямом эфире. Для этого жмите по ссылочке stream.polishturm.com. Вот. Ну и, конечно, не забывайте ставить лайк. Ну и сейчас, я думаю, вот кроме вопросов, которые мы готовили, я немножко поспрашиваю нашего товарища в целом, что он может еще сказать нашей русскоязычной аудитории, может быть, какие-то пожелания, в целом, может быть, какая-нибудь интересная информация. Thomas, I think it would be interesting if you have anything to say for our Russian audience. Either in general or specifically regarding these elections?
Well, I suppose Russians are very impacted by the developments in America. I think that's reflected in the media, the Russian media that you referenced, right? That Russian media is presenting Donald Trump as pro-Russian, that Trump will bring about peace, and particularly, right, in regards to the Ukraine conflict, that Trump will help wind down this conflict and bring it to more of a resolution, as opposed to the Democrats who would inflame the Ukraine conflict, right, by arming Ukraine more and supporting a NATO intervention in Ukraine. So there's a lot of connection between American politics and the situation in Russia. But I would point out that Trump is not trusted. He's not worth trusting in this regard in terms of the safety of Russian people. Trump's main interests are to American capital. And this is a time of great crisis in American capital. So if the situation is bad enough, Trump will embrace whatever policy is needed by the American capitalist. And he is, open to collaboration with the Democrats. And what's already been mentioned is that there's a shared program between Republicans and Democrats in terms of provoking new conflict, especially in near Russia, in regards to Iran or China or Russia. There are negative consequences that can come about from Trump as well as the Democrats. So we can't trust that Trump will actually be a peace candidate. I think it's actually laughable to say that Trump is a peace candidate because he signals more conflict in spheres where Russia is in conflict. Russia is active in places like Syria, right? Russia is friends with Iran. So Trump doesn't signal peace in these spheres for Russia. And so it's possible that Trump will actually lead to Russia becoming more tied up in more conflicts. Russia will be more militarily engaged with conflicts in places like Iran or Syria. And overall, he's going to have hostile intentions in terms of American trade and, we all know here in America about the anti-Russian boycott, right, and the economic situation inside Russia that's resulting from that, and the turn by Russia even closer towards China. Trump will try to benefit America from this situation, and he'll try to maybe address or take down some of this boycott. That's possible, and some people might see this as pro-Russian. But really, Trump's attitude towards the boycott or any Russian boycott would be to increase the sale of American goods, increase the influence of American capital. And that's going to come, at the disadvantage of Russian people. So he's not going to try to create good relations with Russia for the benefit of the Russian people. He's going to want to bring money back into the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
And that includes through war. So money can come into the U.S. through increasing conflicts and wars that Russia can also be involved in.
Yeah, one of the interesting potential things can be him trying to portray the U.S. as under new administration as being more open for negotiations with the Russian government, especially again, since you mentioned the growing Russian connection with China. I would even say that actually the first signs of this being dissatisfied with this connection are being shown among the Russian capitalists. Just recently we published an article about Chinese capital expanding in Russia, and Russian capitalists are already showing their anger. They say that Chinese capitalists don't want to localize. They're more aggressive. They just expand and they don't want to negotiate with you. And they say that European partners were actually more open, more soft, more reliable, and they were easier to communicate with. While Chinese are very aggressive on the Russian markets. And I think this is something that Trump could play on, like say, look, we will lift some of the sanctions, we will allow some of the companies. I think companies that are controlled by pro-Republican oligarchs will benefit from this, and trying to play on this contradiction.
Yes, I think that's right, that Trump is known for this anti-China trade war situation, and Russian capitalists might see that as an opportunity for them, and so end up, increasing this inter-imperialist competition, between the U.S. and China because it might benefit Russia, right? And will that be good or bad for the Russian people? I can't say, but we know that the Russian capitalist doesn't have the interest of the people at heart, of course.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. And what can you tell our Russian audience in general? Anything to it?
Well, there is a lot of anti-Russian sentiment in the U.S., and I recall one of the first conversations that I had on one of these streams with the Russian audience was many years ago now, and that situation was the same. A lot of anti-Russian attitude, especially among Democrats, but among Republicans as well. So I would say that don't think that simply the Democrats are anti-Russia and the Republicans are pro-Russia. Republicans have a lot of negative feelings about Russia as well. So if Trump wanted to provoke hostilities with Russia, he would have the support of many Republicans. And they say that they're anti-war on Ukraine now, but this can easily be reversed in an instant. Very quickly, Trump could rally antipathy against Russia, and in fact, Trump could boost his favorability by hostilities with Russia, right? Because he would gain more support among right-wing Democrats who are very anti-Russia. So Trump, does threaten Russia as well. And the American people, I think, can be manipulated into, being against Russia more and more. So I think internationalism and building, bonds of humanity between Russian and American people is very important. Well, there's a lot that we have in common and that we can actually unite around. So hopefully this, anti-Russian feeling among Americans isn't going to contribute to any hostilities in the future. They're not going to support any hostilities, hopefully. But I just hope that there's not too much anti-American attitude among Russians as well, while we're trying to find solidarity between the workers of Russia and America.
Mm-hmm. Well, I can only say that it seems Russians are still enjoying eating burgers and wearing jeans, even though they are currently produced not by McDonald's but by its Russian replacement called Вкусная точка, and jeans are also produced there, though American style of living, globalization, westernization had its consequences on the Russian society, and by capitalism itself connects Russian and American peoples, especially workers, connects them in their economic conditions, connects them in their struggle against capital, because we all know that capitalists only play that they're against each other, and when it's needed, they are always together against workers. So we have more similarities than differences, anyways.
Right. It's the same with the anti-Russian attitude among Americans, that this is just, it's promoted by mass media, it's promoted by official Democrat politicians. So there's so much pushing Americans into thinking this way, thinking that Russians are evil, orcs and things like this, that Russia is this special state, the special evil state, that's, Russia and the Soviet Union become one thing, this one evil entity that Americans get pointed at. But I think there's a lot of potential for Americans to reject this attitude that's being pushed on them. So we have to, hope that there's not too much provocation in the meantime, because, if there is hostilities, Americans will have this automatic reaction, and Americans will support their own government against whoever they're facing. So opposing these hostilities and opposing the provocative statements of our capitalists and our media, I think is the most important thing we can do to fight against this force. This war isn't inevitable, or hostilities between Russia and America aren't inevitable, but they certainly are building. And this is something to be worried about for Americans. Americans should be, people say, oh, we'll kick Russia's ass, we'll do a bunch of damage and we won't take any harm ourselves, but any conflict will be horrible for both sides, and America won't be better off if they embrace this anti-Russian attitude.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Наш товарищ считает, что одним из направлений, по которым Трамп может попытаться разъединить российский и китайский капитал, это экономические отношения. Однако в целом рассчитывать на то, что Трамп действительно является каким-то миротворцем, не приходится. Скорее наоборот, текущее положение сохранится, если даже не ухудшится. Также он отметил, что среди американцев действительно распространены антироссийские настроения, в том числе связанные с отождествлением России и Советского Союза, но в действительности у рядовых американцев и рядовых российских граждан гораздо больше сходств, чем различий, и, конечно, у них больше сходств прежде всего в их борьбе с капиталом, в их постоянной постоянном социальном расслоении, неравенстве, угнетении. Все это имеет место как в России, так и в Соединенных Штатах. И на этой основе российским и американским рабочим есть возможности для объединения своей борьбы. Я бы даже еще сказал, что если вот так посмотреть, то вот эти вот центральные районы, регионы Соединенных Штатов во многом по своему уровню развития схожи с отдельными сибирскими регионами, тоже мало инфраструктуры, потому что у нас, может быть, не все знают, но Соединенные Штаты в большинстве своем развиты прежде всего на обеих побережьях, на побережье Атлантического и Тихого океанов. То есть именно там в основном сосредоточена вся жизнь, люди, производство, и чем ближе к центру страны, тем меньше всего этого. Точно так же, как у нас, скажем, чем ближе к Москве, тем лучше инфраструктура, и чем дальше, скажем, в Сибирь, чем дальше мы отходим от железных дорог, от Транссибирской магистрали, от БАМа на север, тем хуже. И вот по уровню глубинности, скажем так, эти регионы совпадают с Соединенными Штатами, с центральными. Вот. Ну, я думаю, на этом мы будем закругляться. Опять же, это был, я надеюсь, для наших зрителей очень интересный, как сейчас говорят, experience. Experience по-английски — это опыт. Вот, возможно, мы в будущем проведем что-нибудь похожее, тем более, что как бы Трампа-то выбрали, но президентом официально он еще не стал, потому что в Соединенных Штатах инаугурация проходит в начале января. И с одной стороны, интересно будет, что действительно предпримет Трамп, а с другой стороны, его противники планируют организовать некий марш протеста. Так что я думаю, что о Трампе мы в ближайшее время еще вспомним, и, может быть, еще вот поговорим с нашим американским товарищем, когда там будут снова активные события. Ну, я думаю, на этом у нас сегодня все. Большое спасибо всем, кто сегодня пришел на наш стрим. Не забудьте поставить лайк, подписаться, конечно, если вы еще не подписались, и прожимайте колокольчик, чтобы не пропустить следующие стримы. На этом у меня все. Большое спасибо еще раз всем, кто пришел. Thomas, we are finishing the stream. I think it's time to say goodbye to our Russian audience, though I think we will meet again because just in 2 months we will have Trump's inauguration, and something interesting can definitely happen here.
Oh, спасибо, товарищи. That was my best Russian. But yeah, I hope I can come back and I hope this was helpful for Russian viewers. Thank you for having me speak with you today.
Thank you too. Thank you for taking your time for it, especially since, well, for us it's, for example, in Moscow time it's almost 9 p.m., while for you it's going to be just an afternoon.
Yeah, not too hard for me to be here. It was a good time.
All right. Thank you and goodbye. See you next time.
Спасибо.